I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and if you've been a subscriber for a while, you'll know that we think the new G20 BMW 3 Series is a pretty good small luxury sedan. But does the formula get better when you add plug-in hybrid elements to this vehicle? In today's video, we're going to find out. This is the BMW 330e, a plug-in hybrid version of the new BMW 3 Series, and as the badge suggests, BMW consider the 330e to be basically on par with the combustion 330i, a vehicle that's rated very highly by us in both sedan and touring station wagon form. Now here in Australia, the 330e comes as a sedan only, but the spec level is basically the same as the 330i, save for the obvious powertrain differences. The 330e packs a slightly detuned 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, but it adds a 9 kilowatt-hour usable battery and an electric motor producing 83 kilowatts of power. And this vehicle's combined figures of 215 kilowatts and 420 newton meters of torque are pretty impressive. But how does the 330e come together in the real world? Well, later in the video, we'll talk about how this vehicle runs under electric power alone, and then how it works when you just drive it as a conventional hybrid. Do you actually save fuel? Is it efficient? And what does this thing really cost to run? We'll get into all of those questions in today's video. But first of all, we'll start inside. The whole point of a plug-in hybrid like the 330e is that it's meant to feel familiar, unthreatening, similar to the 330i that it's based on. And in the cabin here, that's exactly what you get. Save for a few hybrid and electric specific buttons and modes that you can select here between the seats, everything else looks effectively like the BMW 330i. And that's no bad thing because the current gen BMW 3 Series has an excellent interior. Build quality is very high, probably the highest in the segment, I think. And I personally like the aesthetic, even though it's a little more conservative than rivals like the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, for example. That being said, the layout is very clear, relaxing, there's physical buttons for everything you'd want physical buttons for, and the level of technology in the cabin is just comfortable. Like, it's not overdone, you've still got up-to-the-minute technology like wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but in many ways it still feels a little bit analog in the tradition of a BMW 3 Series. That starts with an excellent driving position, a classic rear-wheel drive driving position where you sit very low in the seat, or in the car I should say, with your legs stretched out in front of you, the steering wheel is in a good position, and your visibility is good, but you do sit low in the traffic, making the car feel even more agile and lithe. The seats are great, very supportive, shapely. These are the M Sport seats, so we are getting slightly taller bolsters, and the bolsters are inflatable as standard. This car is specified with Cognac Vernasca leather, which looks absolutely fantastic. If it's not your thing, there are actually quite a lot of colors available on the standard range in the 3 Series, which is really great. You can customize this car more so than an Audi A4 or a Mercedes C-Class, for example. Now, the trim in this vehicle is BMW's aluminium tetragon. I find it a bit of a upsetting optical illusion, actually. I'd probably just go for brushed aluminium or open pore wood. There's a variety of combinations you can choose. Now, BMW are loving a thick steering wheel at the moment on any car that has M Sport branding or above, and this vehicle is no different. I'm not sure who exactly can really get their hands around this thing, but it's massive. Nice to see a lovely leather-stitched airbag cover though, and then you look forward to digital gauges, 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster. It's okay, you can't put a full map or a satellite map or anything there like in an Audi A4, and the tachometer is a reverse sweep, which I know not everybody likes, but you know, it works fine. And then here in the center, we've got a 10.25-inch touchscreen running BMW iOS 7. You can also control it through the iDrive controller, which I prefer. That works really well. And the vehicle's standard stereo is excellent, but if you want even more punch, you can option in a Harman Kardon system too. Plus, practicality is decent, wireless smartphone charging, medium-sized cup holders, decent box between the seats with a USB-C charger for fast charging, and big door bins as well. So up front, it's really quite a pleasant place to be. As anybody that's aware of the car market knows, BMW now have a huge amount of models in their range. So where a BMW 3 Series might once have needed to carry people in the back quite often, these days my view is that for most buyers this would be a second car, and there's probably a large SUV in the garage alongside it. And the BMW X5 is also available in plug-in hybrid form. Here in the 3 Series, I consider the backseat to be more of an occasional place. That being said, the dimensions are actually very good. For myself at 6 foot, I've got decent headroom, another inch or two, despite the fact this car is specified with a sunroof. Legroom's good, tow room is acceptable. The middle seat is a real perch, so you wouldn't want to use that too much, but the outboard seats are perfectly comfortable. And you have amenities like air vents, a separate temperature zone, and 2 USB-C fast charging ports, plus a flip down armrest. Plus, the materials back here are just as soft and acceptable as the ones up the front. So even though I don't think many people will be maxing out the seating capacity of their 3 Series too often, it's nice to know that the room on offer is quite decent. Well, so far, so simple. But then we come around here to the back of the BMW 330e, and we find one of this vehicle's only clear compromises. And that's that the plug-in hybrid variant of the 3 Series sedan has a smaller boot than the combustion vehicle that it's based on. Now you still get a power tailgate, which feels like a true indulgence on a small sedan like this one. And you'll see here we've managed to get 2 of the chasing car's suitcases in, the biggie and the smallest of the lot. But overall boot space is down to 375 litres compared to 480 litres in the combustion version. You also have a problem because your charging cables are stored in a separate bag down the back of the boot there. Of course, you could ditch those if you want to, but then if you need to plug this car in or want to plug it in somewhere, then you won't have your cables on you. So it all just gets a little bit, confused. Then underneath this boot floor, what we have is a little bit more storage. And then underneath that, you have no spare wheel. So this car relies on run flat tires, something BMW have been kind of trying to move away from in recent years, but the packaging constraints of a plug-in hybrid make that a little bit difficult. Now overseas, you can get the 330e as a station wagon, which I think would have made more sense for Australia because A, it wouldn't have so many constraints in terms of the cargo area, and B, a super niche car like this is already one that's only going to really appeal to your enthusiasts. And enthusiasts in this space tend to like wagons, so I probably would have made a different planning choice, but I understand why the sedan form factor was the one they went for, because that accounts for the vast majority of 3 Series sales as a whole here in Australia. Of course, one of the big questions with any plug-in hybrid is what these vehicles really cost to run. First of all, we'll get an easy one out of the way, which is insurance. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer has paid $1,547 to comprehensively insure a BMW 3 Series. Of course, that pricing can vary based on where you live, your driving history, and how you garage the car, so you can get a quote at budgetdirect.com.au. But onto the more complicated stuff. And that's what this thing costs to fuel, or what it costs to put energy into it. And it really comes down to how you drive a plug-in hybrid. What BMW would like you to do is have a garage where you can charge this car every night. And if you do that, then it is very cheap to run. If you use off-peak power here in New South Wales, Australia, for example, and you're paying about 15 cents per kilowatt hour, you'll be able to put about 40 kilometres worth of range into this car for around $1.35 in Australian dollars. And that's around 4 times cheaper than the equivalent petrol you'd put into the car. And that is pretty attractive. Even on sort of median peak power prices, you'll still be saving around 50% compared to fueling this thing with petrol. However, if you never charge up this vehicle, it's only ever going to be about as economical as a BMW 330i, which is considerably cheaper to buy than this car. So if you're going to buy a plug-in hybrid, it's really something that you should lean into. Then there's servicing. What BMW do is they let you pre-purchase service packs on their cars that last for 5 years or 80,000 kilometers of scheduled maintenance. And on the 3 Series, that's going to set you back $1,750, and it's going to cover all of your basic service items, but not things like wiper blades or brakes, for example. Those are going to be more on top. And then there's warranty. BMW Australia are persisting with a 3-year unlimited kilometre warranty, which is now quite poor for the industry, particularly when you consider that Mercedes-Benz offer you 5 years with unlimited kilometres. So what's the BMW 330e like to drive? Well, I've been really looking forward to driving this car, basically, because I think the chassis under the new G23 series is really good. The 330i has really impressed me. And I do think that plug-in hybrid is an interesting solution, including for markets like Australia, where most people do spend most of their time driving in the suburbs or commuting to and from work. Not many people tend to get in the car and drive long distances in between states on a regular basis. But even if you do, a plug-in hybrid can still let you do that. It's kind of a bit of an insurance policy. It's not quite stepping entirely into the world of full electrification. You get a bit of both. Naturally, that also means you get compromises from both sides, but BMW are usually pretty good at minimizing compromise. And so I've been keen to check out their their most important plug-in hybrid work yet here on the 3 Series. So what are we dealing with? Well, we're dealing with a classic plug-in hybrid situation where we've got a quite traditional petrol engine, a small battery, and an electric motor that provides quite a good amount of boost to that petrol. And you can either run one or the other, or you can have the car try and work out a tandem hybrid mode that lets you extract those hallowed combined power and torque figures. But most of the time you won't be doing that, driving the car at 100% effort, getting that combined number. With a plug-in hybrid, if you run it like I do, most of the time you'll either be driving it in electric only mode and therefore getting the best running costs out of this car, or the battery will be pretty low or depleted and you'll be driving it like a conventional hybrid, like a Toyota or Lexus hybrid, for want of a better way to put it, because that's how the 330e behaves when it has a dead battery. But I'll come back to that shortly. Firstly, the figures. So the 2-litre turbocharged petrol in this car, the BMW B48 motor, has a relatively low state of tune, 135 kilowatts of power and 300 newton meters of torque. And then the 330e has an electric motor which makes another 83 kilowatts of power and 250 newton meters of torque. And that results in combined outputs for this car of 215 kilowatts of power and 420 newton meters of torque. Compare that to the 330i, with which this vehicle shares most of its badge, and that car produces 190 kilowatts of power and 400 newton meters of torque. So it's fairly similar, a little bit beefier in the 330e, but the way it works out in the real world is usually quite different, because you're either driving it as a relatively modestly powered EV in electric only mode, or a 135 kilowatt turbo petrol that does benefit from occasional electric boost when you're driving it as a hybrid. It's only really if you have a fully charged battery and you plant the boot that you'll get the full amount of power out of this car. But anyway, I digress. The impressive thing about the way the 330e works is that this is a really, really cohesive hybrid. Probably the best hybrid I've ever driven in terms of minimizing the disruption between the electric motor to the petrol engine when one hands off to the other and you're driving in hybrid mode. BMW have done a great job on the refinement of this vehicle, and in particular the basically imperceptible start-stop function of the petrol engine, which allows the electric torque to just blend into the petrol engine's capability without you really noticing. You would have to be truly looking closely to detect the swap in this car, and even the best Toyota and Lexus hybrids still do have a noticeable, subtle but noticeable step between electric and petrol. BMW have done a very good job in that regard, and that kind of plays into the situation where you're driving the car with a low or almost empty state of battery, and that's going to be the way it is on long drives, because even though you can save the battery capacity, it doesn't really work that well, and the car tends to try and run down the battery before using the engine to its full potential most of the time. But as it turns out, that actually works fine. And when I picked up this car, the battery wasn't charged, which wasn't ideal because the very first thing I had to do was drive it to Goulburn and back. So that's a return trip from Sydney of just over 400 kilometers, and the battery was dead. But what I can report is that on the highway, at least, steady speed, but with lots of hills between here and Goulburn, the 330e returns the same or perhaps slightly better economy than the 330i. I managed about 5.5 litres per 100 kilometres, and I'm really no slouch in any driving situation, so I wasn't driving for economy. And the effect you get is the petrol engine feels strong and refined, just like any BMW B48 motor does. But then when you squirt up a hill, you do get, quite a few seconds of electric boost out of the car, even when it's reporting that it's got 0 kilometers left in the battery. So it kind of works akin to a Toyota hybrid in that situation. Then what you can do, and what I did when I came back from regional New South Wales, is charge up the 330e in your garage overnight and then use the car for commuting. So we've got a battery in this vehicle which is 10.4 kilowatt hour gross. You can use 9.09 kilowatt hours of it, so it is quite a small battery. And when you charge up the car, the screen here sort of says about 48 kilometers of range. In actuality, you'll get 40. The American EPA, for example, says you'll get 35. I think that's a little bit negative. I've been able to get 40, and so that's consumption of about 23 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which isn't great. It's not as optimized as something like a Tesla Model 3, a full EV, but it isn't too bad, and you'll be able to get, depending on your commute, either a day or a couple of days of all electric traveling out of this car. And as I mentioned when we discussed the running costs, if you do charge it up at off-peak times, that's pretty cheap running in the 330e. But the car costs $7,000 more to purchase compared to a 330i, and there's no government incentives or anything like that in Australia. So from a purely financial point of view, the 330i still makes a lot of sense. I would also say that from a purely cohesive perspective, the 330i is still a better car to drive. There doesn't need to be a handover from electric to petrol in the 330i, so you just get the same type of linearity from the petrol engine in that car without any handover. Of course, you're never going to be able to run it in electric only mode because it doesn't have that capability. I'm just saying it's smoother. It's also a lot lighter, the 330i that is. So it's more tossable and more fun to drive, and it rides a little bit better, even though BMW have done an excellent job on making the ride and handling of the 330e feel pretty close to the 330i. But when you are loaded up in a fast corner on a country road and you hit a mid-corner bump, the car just jumps across the surface a little bit more, letting you know that there is more mass to contain here. The mass of a medium SUV instead of the mass of a small sedan like the 3 Series. But refinement is always good. Visibility is good, comfort levels are excellent, the stereo is good, and the safety systems are impressive too. We've got adaptive cruise control, AEB, radar and camera on this car, so it's full speed stuff. Really excellent lane centering, assisted driving, BMW calls it, and it works very well. And we have functions like reversing AEB, though you have to turn it on in the infotainment system, so you'll want to make sure you do that before you drive the car too far, because by the time you need something like reversing AEB, it'll be too late to turn it on in the infotainment system. So that brings us to the need for a clear recommendation. Should you buy the BMW 330e? Well, that depends on what your goals are with a car like this. If the goal is to save on running costs, it doesn't really make sense because it'll take you at least 5.5 years to break even compared to the petrol 330i at current petrol and electricity prices. So it isn't really about saving money day to day. If, however, what you want is a G23 series, because it's a good looking car with a nice interior that drives well even in plug-in hybrid form, and you do want to start making a difference, then sure, that can make sense. You just need to know that it's going to cost you quite a lot more to do that. Personally, I'd probably still go the 330i. It's even more cohesive and you can buy it in the touring body style here in Australia. Or of course you could wait for the forthcoming BMW i4, which will be fully electric and similar to this car, if perhaps not quite as good looking. But I'm keen to know your thoughts. Let me know down below the video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.